Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Debate. I'm Let's Farm, and this is my co-host Sweet Pea, and we will be your moderators for this debate. Our topic tonight is Social Democracy Can Fix Capitalism Part 2, and this promises to be an excellent debate. Now, our participants have decided on a change of focus for this debate, and the topic will be Socialism is not a solution for our current economic and social problems, and we are looking forward to this debate. We will be having up to a 10-minute opening per side, 1 hour of open dialogue, and a short closing statement followed by audience questions. Remember to tag the moderators or Let's Debate with your questions for our debaters. Please remember to hit that thumbs up if you like the show. Don't forget to subscribe for more great content. Little reminder to attack the argument and not the debaters or each other. Now, since you're not here to listen to me ramble on, let's get to the show. Void will be going first. And Void, the mic is all yours. They
Um,
they can't hear me
yeah.
at the moment. Um, Let us know, BTB, if you can hear Void now.
Hello, hello. Do you hear me? Waiting for feedback. Hello. It looks like nobody hear me.
I can hear you on. I have YouTube up on my phone and I can hear you. So apparently it's working. And
Should
BTB
I
is not
continue
answering.
or restart?
Actually, I think you should probably restart. But for some reason, you guys are a little quieter than me, so I am going to turn you up.
Okay. So hello. Yeah, I will just repeat as is. In the previous debate with P Barnz, we discussed how viable social democracy is, and we agreed to discuss socialism itself as an economic system separately. So here we go. Um, yeah, I'm convinced that socialism as an economic system is not viable by design, since the whole point of any economic system is to solve the conflict between unlimited amount of stuff people want and limited resources people have. In other words, an economic system ultimately defines what, when, how much, and how is produced and how it is distributed. And we saw tons of horrific examples of non-working socialism and not a single counterexample. I do not think anybody can build such at scale until either we reach post-scarcity or we will get so technologically advanced that so regulated economy at scale would become an actual possibility, which, by the way, would also require to be self-regulated. Otherwise, we will get a one more dictatorship with over-centralized power. Until then, we have to rely on non-so advanced self-regulating systems of distributing limited resources. So let's imagine for a second that we don't know anything about capitalism or even about the concept of money, but we do want to build an economic system. Since we do want to distribute resources, limited resources in an effective way, that would mean we want to direct these resources towards something that produces the most valuable output for the least valuable consumption. If we try to actually introduce some metric which represents the value of output and input, then we kind of invent money. And if we want to reward those who produce the most and consume the least, proportionally to how effective they are, then we basically invent capitalism. Meanwhile, socialists require to reward and punish extremely disproportional to actual use and harm. They require to reward spent man hours rather than rewarding effective transformation of input to more valuable output. It leads and always led before to a couple of fundamental problems. First, the economy gradually goes out of the balance, slowly shifting towards consuming manpower without effective production of goods. And secondly, a risky and innovative activity with high benefit to the society is severely crippled. On top of that, there are many other problems like necessity to put dictatorship in place without any checks and balances to actually get enough power to enforce socialism and enforce innovative activity in that environment. For example, you might know how Korolev basically did his research out of some kind of scientific prison after being a slave basically for a few months in a labor camp in Kolyma, where he almost died. But yet, even with these harsh sacrifices, USSR managed to lag decades behind developed countries by actual goods available for a median person until its very end. Which, by the way, was caused by pure economics. Sorry for my English. Even now, we have states which still claim to be socialist, but they either know better than USSR, like North Korea, or they shifted towards capitalism. So I do admire the socialists' intents, but I categorically disagree with their proposal in terms of economics, at least. If you want to build a socialist or communist utopia without brutal dictatorship and without an effective economy, then you first need to solve these two problems. Reach post-scarcity, where the main resources are not longer limited, and develop self-regulated, decentralized means of social control and enforcement. The fastest known way to get there is by using capitalism. While socialist experiments only put the society in excruciating conditions and decades behind others. So let's learn from Sweden, Norway, Netherlands, Switzerland, and any other example of properly functioning democracy. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that opening statement, Boyd. And we now turn to P Barnz for his opening. Take it away, P Barnz. The mic is now yours.
Hello, everybody, and thank you to the moderators, and thank you to Void for continuing this discussion. I really enjoyed the last one, and I'm looking forward to talking about a lot of these topics today as well. I think it's been a few months since our previous discussion, and look, I'm glad that we have an opportunity to rehash, because I think now more than ever, with the current state of the world, that this is a really, really important topic to go over. As we both and all of us wade through this neoliberal hellscape that we currently look at. Just to take a snapshot of where we sit in the world now, during the pandemic, the world's 10 richest men doubled their wealth during the pandemic from 700 billion to 1.5 trillion with a T. If, according to Oxfam, and I encourage everyone to have a look at Oxfam's reports that they do into income inequality around the world, if we were to have a one-off 99% tax on those 10 richest men just on the wealth that they extracted from the rest of the world during the pandemic, we would be able to vaccinate the world with all vaccinations, not just COVID. We would be able to do that for free. We would be able to provide worldwide universal healthcare and social protection. We would be able to fund full climate adaptation for the world, and we would be able to reduce the gender-based violence that only increased during the pandemic. All of this, right? If we were to give them that one-off 99% tax, all of those 10 men would still be $8 billion better off than the start of the pandemic. If we were to nationalize 99.9999% of the wealth of those 10 people, they would still be better off than 99% of the world. Void talked a lot about concepts of scarcity and scarce resources. I would say when 10 people have that amount of wealth and resources that they have extracted from the rest of the world, I would say that what we are talking about is trying to solve problems that only capitalism produces, and that continuing to work within a capitalist framework, we are continuing to reward where these problems came from. The concept of scarce resources. Okay, the concept of not being able to produce enough with what we have. The reason that we can't produce enough with what we have is because the wealth has been concentrated so severely within a small number of people. Now, unfortunately, we are also seeing, if we continue to work within a capitalist framework, we're also seeing, especially in the US, where it's becoming, where it's out in the open now. It is out in the open that corporations and wealth and power controls the judicial systems of the world. Okay. We've seen that the US Supreme Court has now been purchased, and it's had a nice redecoration into a religiously extreme nightmare. And we're now seeing the effects of that with a Nebraska teen recently jailed because medical decisions are now the responsibility of the government. Money is power, and the rich use that power to create artificial class divides. Under a socialist framework, the government's place, until the government is no longer needed, the government's place is to prevent class struggles and prevent class divides. All we see government doing now is creating additional class divides. Okay, couple of definitions. Okay, because we've already brought up Stalinism, and we can have it. And in the open discussion, we can have a bit of a discussion on the differences between Stalinism and the more traditional Marxism, which is something that I would promote. Okay, so I think some definitions are important. A aforementioned large country did a really, really good job at ensuring that multiple generations were indoctrinated that communism or socialism are interchangeable and they're the same thing, and that Stalinism and communism are exactly the same thing. And they're both just evil concepts that should be discarded and shouldn't be considered, that should be just thrown away. And I'm glad that Void, in his response, has actually had a reasoned and educated response against socialism, and not the typical American socialism as evil. So a couple of definitions. What is socialism? So socialism is the concept that somehow, in some form, in some way, humans need to produce their means of survival. Marx called the means by which we do this the mode of production. Now, when socialists talk about the abolishment of personal property, that's what we are talking about. We are talking about the abolishment of privately owned property being the mode of production. A lot of people have the misconception that when socialists talk about the abolishment of private property, they're talking about taking away your personal possessions. No, we're not. You can keep your toothbrush, you can keep your Xbox, you can keep your things. What we are talking about is the means for your survival should be in the hands of the workers rather than in the hands of the small few. from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Also, another concept that started the discussion between Void and myself was the concept of exploitation. Now, we can actually talk about how capitalism and how to maintain the standard of living that we enjoy now in the West, there is required a level of exploitation of the global South. And we have seen that through colonialism. And we've seen that through the disproportionate value of the goods that are produced in the countries compared to the wages that they actually provide. But what we are talking about when we talk about exploitation is we are talking about the necessary function within capitalism of exploitation, and that is through excess salary. When you go to work of a week, there becomes a point where you have worked enough, where enough of your labor has been converted into capital that you will survive. You can pay your basic necessities, and you have and you can maintain basic survival for that week. You cannot then turn around to your boss and go, "Hey boss, I've got everything I need. I'm going to head off home." That's not how it works. If you are not committed to continuing to work beyond your means of survival and to have that additional excess labor taken from you, then capitalism does not work. The exploitation that socialists talk about is the exploitation of that excess labor. Unless the excess is exploited, capitalism ceases to exist. Now, the other topic I'd like to introduce and I'd like to expand on a little bit more is the pandemic, is the response to the pandemic. Okay. Here in Australia, we're currently going through both sides of Parliament are pretty much in lockstep on this. What our Labor government, which is more socially democratic than our Liberal National Party, what they have decided to do is they're proposing building a $10 billion or creating a $10 billion investment fund, that the proceeds of which would be used to build safe and affordable housing. We have a serious housing crisis here. My rent here has gone up more than 20% in the last year, and rental prices are going pretty crazy within Australia at the moment. Okay, what they're proposing to do is, as we know, during the pandemic, businesses, non-financial corporations, not only did they pass on the additional costs of production during the pandemic, they gouged more. In many countries, they're legally obligated to do this. This isn't a crisis. This isn't a bug of capitalism. This is capitalism working as it's supposed to. And I find it really, really hard to fathom a way that we can somehow modify this system, or that we can suggest that this system can be used to fix social problems. Unfortunately, neoliberalism, I don't foresee any way that there are market solutions to social problems. They are two different things. Okay, so while these companies continue to extract wealth from us, now we know that this is the major cause of inflation around the world. We know that nearly half of the current inflation worldwide has been caused by corporate greed. What are governments saying around the world? Governments are complaining here in Australia about unemployment. They're complaining in a system where you need to participate to survive. Our government and our Reserve Bank are complaining that too many people are participating. Too many people are surviving for the system to work properly. This is absurd. And even saying it out loud, seeing it written in the newspaper, the Reserve Bank governor comes out and said, well, we really wish that unemployment was higher, where what he really means is there's too many people participating in a system where participation is mandatory for your survival. What's the government's response to this? They want to take $10 billion, borrow it on our behalf, give it to the companies that caused the problem in the first place, and then give the proceeds to property developers who are the cause of the rental crisis we have at the moment. This is an absurd system that, rather than rehabilitate, we should be looking at ways of removing it and moving to a system that has some sort of equality, has some sort of fairness, puts the means of production back into the hands as it was. This is a cyclical thing. Originally, humans' earliest form of surviving was socialism. Then we moved to agriculture and slavery. We moved into feudalism. Now we're in capitalism. It is time to see that full circle and move back to a system where the resources are shared and the resources are not hoarded. Sorry, just looking at my notes here. The last thing, and I think this is one thing. Yeah, I know I get off in a rant and I forget where I was going. Don't laugh at me. The last thing that I'd like to talk about, or that I'd like to introduce, and we can talk about more in the open discussion, because I think Void and I would probably agree on climate change, that it's something that's real. I don't think we'd have any silly bits about it being some sort of manufactured outrage. I think that we'd both agree that it's a thing. I think that under capitalism in any form, capitalism by its very design will find the cheapest means to produce the most. Okay, gross domestic product is essentially a KPI that countries use to gauge how quickly they can turn natural resources into garbage, basically. So capitalism will continue to find the cheapest way of doing things, and it will only increase costs, because let's face it, climate change is going to cost us money. It's going to cost us money to reform our way of life, but it's going to take more than just installing nuclear power stations or installing solar or wind. And that's about all that I have. And look, we can talk more about the concepts of scarcity. We can talk about abundance, producing enough to satisfy need. Because personally, I think that we're talking about trying to fix problems that only capitalism has created. And that's me done.
All right. Thank you, P Barnz, for your opening. We will now move into the open dialogue, where our debaters will have up to an hour to cross-examine each other. Debaters, have at it.
Yeah, I have wrote down like 30 points where I disagree. So
let's go.
I don't know.
Where do we start? Look, let's tackle, because look, I think I prepared my statement a little bit differently to the direction you were going in. So maybe we can start with one of the points that you brought up. And I guess my first question, and the first thing that you could try to explain is, you talk about scarcity. And you talk about this, you seem to suggest that somehow, given the truncation of wealth in the world, that there is some sort of problem with being able to produce enough for everybody, right? Yes. And that creates a level of I can't. Can you put that together in my head, where 10 people own so much in the world, right? 150 from 700 billion to 1.5 trillion dollars during some of the toughest working conditions we've ever seen. Like, the resources, I guess from my opinion, the resources are there. They just need to be distributed equally.
How do you think, if somebody owns $1 billion and another person owns $1, does this person who owns $1 billion consume billion times more food than the person who owns $1?
No, but what they have done is they have taken the excess labor, right? They have taken the excess of what what a lot of other people have produced, and they have kept it for themselves. And rather than reinvesting, right, under a socialist system, that excess would be used to, it would be used to look for more it would be used to invest in more sustainable ways and to look at sustainability. It would be looking at the collective rather than the individual.
Okay, so from what I see, we have too many points of contention, so maybe we should zoom out and
Sure.
think a bit more fundamentally. So so our main contention is, I'm against seizing the private ownership on the means of production, and you are for that. Yeah, and I think we need to dance from that. If we go through your opening statement, it feels like the first third of that is about wealth redistribution. And again, I pointed at Scandinavian countries where it's different. It's not as where you shown. As much tax, so how many tax you want to put on somebody is a political question. It's not a question of who owns means of production. It's a question of who owns the government. If people owns the government, and if they decided they want to put this tax, then this tax will be. So about socialism itself, there was a section where you were talking about socialism itself. I totally agree with the most of you said. I indeed saw a lot of people who do not understand this
It's a
basic
very
concepts.
this is well, I mean, there is a shining light on this. I believe that there was a poll I saw recently when you actually look at I believe the age group was under 30. Right, in the US right now, at least 40% believe in, or at least, I mean, I'm hoping this shows that at least 40% of people understand what socialism is. But the push for socialism grows more and more as people's material conditions get worse. Right, and on Sweden, I brought up this point in our last debate. Sweden is not, when it comes to actually redistributing and actually making sure that people have a fair go, while a lot of working conditions are very good in Sweden, when it comes to income inequality, Sweden is getting very close to the rest of the world, right? Between 2002,
Wait, what do you think is more important? So that everybody is socially protected well enough to apply themselves in their life and things like that, or if everybody is equal?
Oh, that's a very good question, because I think the latter.
Oh, this is
latter.
Unexpected.
No, well, I think that the latter leads to the former. I don't think there's, well, for my, I guess my, and it's not, I think that both are equally important, but I don't think that's a dichotomy. I think the latter is I think the latter is essentially the first as well.
I think, okay, this is a strong contention here. Let's discuss this.
Yeah.
I think that the only way to make a society effective is to have social structures so that effective people distribute more resources, non-effective people distribute less resources. And thus, you should have inequality to be effective. And Sweden is a good example of that. People there are socially protected, they're fine. Moreover, you were talking about climate change, but they have 70% of energy from renewables. So like they don't have all of these problems which you are enumerated. So like inequality is not the problem.
A third of the Swedish population own nothing. Between 2002 and 2017, the top 1% concentrated so in 2000, I've still got my notes here from the last debate. So right, in 2002, right before Sweden, so Sweden in 2002 they had to take some austerity measures, right? Just like France had to do under Francois Mitterrand. Sweden had to reduce employment benefits. It cut taxes to the rich, and it also largely canned its inheritance tax, right? In 2002, before they made those changes, the top 1% in Sweden owned only 18% of the country's wealth. By 2007, this was 42% and rising, right? And as I said, nearly a third of Sweden's population has only net debt, right? So the top 1% now own 42% of the resources within Sweden, and 30%, the bottom third of Sweden's population, own nothing. What happens during a crisis?
What do you mean by own nothing? They have social protections.
They have only net debt. They have only net debt.
If you even don't own anything, you are socially protected. You are provided with the means of survival as you require in your opening statement.
Right. But
so what's the problem? A state is taking care of this because it can cut taxes from capitalist state because capitalist state is an effective state.
right? But what happens when, like, the problem is the well understood concept of capital flight, right? We know
Agree.
that business will only tolerate social democracy and will only tolerate higher taxes for a protracted period of time before that capital will leave a country.
I agree here, but again, this is a political problem which is in process of solving. People European Union right now is trying to enforce a law so that if you try, even if you are IT company who can do money remotely, if you do money remotely using personal data of citizens of European Union, then you need to pay taxes as required. It's like a proposition right now. It is being discussed, but what I'm saying is this is solvable through political means, and you don't need to seize private ownership of the means of production. And again, I will repeat from my opening statement, every time you tried to seize this right for ownership, every single time you had a disaster. So why do you think you would avoid it this time?
Well, I think that, and it's an extremely good point, and this is always the point of these discussions that becomes difficult for the socialist side. And I will concede that, yes, the attempts, I'd say, not the attempts at socialism or communism, the terms we use interchangeably by Marx and Engels, but what we're really talking about is socialism. I'd say that those attempts have been perverted by moving away from what Marx and Engels originally saw as more orthodox socialism, right? So Stalin saw the increased power of the Russian proletariat. Rather than focusing on what Marx saw is the first thing that must happen, right? The first thing that you need to do once you have the means production is to give that excess labor back to the proletariat. That is the first thing that needs to happen, right? Under Mao, we're talking about a country that largely industrialized itself while maintaining. Marx always saw capitalism and an industrialized a nation to be industrialized, then to turn to communism. Right? I don't think Marx would have agreed with China in the state that it was, going straight to a socialist model, and that's why we saw horrible famines under Mao. Stalin's overemphasis on trying to increasingly. Marx wanted to reduce class conflict. Stalin continued class conflict, right? The classes that he created were those that were with him and those that were against him. This is what Stalin did was essentially not a Marxist model. He became over-authoritarian. That's why we call it Stalinism. And then if you want to look at South America, the CIA seems to have a lot to say about countries in South America moving to a socialist model. So I know it's a bit of a trope, but I don't think we have many examples of communist or true socialism going bad. But yeah, feel free to now say no true Scotsman fallacy.
I don't think true socialism is a thing, because Marx in his like Capital and stuff, he predicted different future than happened. So the dynamics he explained there apparently is wrong. So apparently what he wrote there is not reality we live in. So different people, I would say, different regimes tried to implement it in different ways. And whatever they tried, they always got to what we saw. We can, in my mind, I kind of okay. I don't want to reiterate my opinion statement, but okay. Feel free to take over the conversation here.
It's all right if you want to reiterate the point. I guess and look, I get it. And look, it's an easy win when we're talking about these sorts of discussions, right? And I think this is part of the go for it.
Yeah, let me ask you this question: why you are unhappy with how we move without abolishing the right for means of production? I mean, to own that, because during like last 100 years, proletariat like improved their quality of life drastically. You could say, like in short term, last 20 or so years in the US, the quality of life of proletariat haven't improved. But if we talk globally on the planet, it's still improved during these years. And the problem of the US is problem of the US, of their political system. It's not a problem of capitalism.
I would argue that those two things are intertwined. I think that the American political system and worldwide the political systems worldwide are so intertwined with, like I said, the highest court in America, right? So where a lot of political power is truncated, right? So the body that essentially interprets the American Constitution, one of the countries with more resources than any other country in the world. I think they spend more on their military than the next 20 countries, right? And most of those countries behind them are allies, right? They spend more on the military than I believe is the entire economy of Australia, right? We're talking about a country with immense wealth. It's the body that interprets its constitution, the body that interprets the piece of paper that apparently is the lifeblood, is now owned by Harlan Crow, is now owned by a small number of people who are dictating decisions to them. That's probably a completely different topic, but I say, rather than going to the specifics of it, I don't think that the concept of government dictating to business is one that we don't see worldwide. Businesses dictate to government. Money,
okay.
And for it.
Yeah, okay. I don't think we can actually conclude anything here, because I would say no, because we have, again, Scandinavian countries where people decide, and if you go with a lot of money, you still cannot change the political system, because if people are unhappy, they will just create new party from scratch, and it will just take the majority, as happened in Netherlands, as I mentioned last time during debate. So I disagree with this argument. But I wanted to say something else, not that. This. Wait. What I wanted to say, it wasn't that.
But that brings up another point. Just with what you were talking about there with the people and creating a new party, right? This is another problem, right? With your question before, okay, around which I think is more important. Do I think equality is more important? Do I think that the means of production? Do I think that equal split of resources is more important, or do I think fixing social problems and making sure there are social safety nets? Right. Unfortunately, there is in most countries at least 50% of the population that don't believe in a social safety net. Right. 10% of Americans believe in Pizzagate, for Christ's sake. Like we're talking about populations that have been so indoctrinated by, again, the control of the media. One man, Rupert Murdoch, is such a heavy influence in the politics of so many countries, through Sky News here in Australia, through having right-wing newspapers in most states in Australia, through his ownership of the Fox network and many of its affiliates. These people control like massive amounts of political power, right? More than the unequal distribution of wealth renders democracy a farce.
Okay, I think there is another angle. For me, less entities you have, which kind of so You have a political system. In the US, you basically have two entities, Democratic Party and Republican Party. And two is better than one, but is also very bad. So more entities you have who compete for human opinion, the better. And if you try to seize the right of ownership of the means of production, then you reduce the amount of entities to one, which is terrible. Because there will be one coordinator of all these means, it is the state, and it will do with people whatever it wants.
Yes, I agree, and there are examples of that. But again, I'd probably talk to what Marx's original. And look, I get that there are aspects of Marx's hypothesis and Marx and Engels' predictions that didn't come to fruition when it came to the material conditions around the world. I agree to that. I don't think we should discount what they're saying completely, right? So under Marx's idea, first thing is, yes, the surplus labor needs to go to the people, or the people need to democratically decide the use of that surplus. The government remains only as a means by which to prevent new classes from arising and preventing class struggles. That becomes its function. But the view of the reason that I believe that even under a 2-party, 3-party, whatever party system, the reason that it doesn't work at the moment, and the reason that it's still prone to the biggest and heaviest wallet being the one that maintains uneven power within that system, is because democracy is designed to continue, right? Under Marxism, the government is designed to be an entity that we no longer need. That once there are systems in place where you go to work, you get what you need, and then you fulfill yourself in activities that you enjoy. You don't have to worry about money. You don't have to worry about these additional pressures that have been artificially put onto ourselves. And I know this is sounding very idealistic, but that is the end goal. None of the end goal, adding a third party, adding a fourth party, all you're doing is you're just creating additional class divides, when the real enemy are those that take 30-40% of our wages at the end of the day. I go to work, someone else gets that means, purely because they own the building in which I produce that work.
Let's imagine for a second that we have like social democracy all around the world with capitalism, but with wealth tax, like 99.9%, everything that goes beyond like $1 million a month.
Yeah.
So would you be satisfied in this environment?
No, because there's insufficient protections from we haven't even started talking about climate change and other things like that. We're talking about a pure, but that's a side topic. No, because it's still, I don't believe that it would be sustainable. There would still be, it would only last for as long as the rich wanted it to last. There will always be a right when people. So there are, and I've been talking about this, and I've been trying to look at the reasons that people turn to right-wing politics, right, and the reasons that people turn to reactionary politics. There will still remain the crucible, right? There will still remain the conditions that see people turning towards the right, and to turn towards more reactionary politics. Right, there will always be a pendulum. I fail to see how would it work. Yeah, probably, but I don't think it would last. I don't think that socially democratic. I don't think that social democracy, like for instance, right? Look at some African countries, right? Or look at India. They go, hey, how about we're going to tax rich people, right? They'd laugh at you. Like, with the vast majority of their population in poverty because of capitalism,
Ironically, India claims to be a socialist state, if I remember correctly, but yeah.
Really? Under Modi? Really? Really?
Yes.
Really?
Let me recheck. I think they do. India, Wikipedia.
Yeah. North Korea claims to be a People's Democratic Republic as well, so it's in the name.
Yeah, okay, it will take more than a minute.
No. That's okay. It's a side topic anyway. So to answer your question, right? Would that be great? Yes. Would it be my end goal under that system? No. I would love to have that as to reduce the wealth and power of the tiny number of people that have amassed and have hoarded immense wealth off the backs of the rest of the world, right? So yes, but I would only like it. I would only be satisfied as a springboard into taking the mode of production back into the workers' hands at some. I believe that would be a good way of moving towards that sort of model.
So let's imagine we don't get to this milestone. Would you suggest to go revolutionarily, or you would suggest to gradually try to move there?
I don't agree with. Look, my standpoint on this, and this is probably a really good segue into the next topic that I want to talk about, is how we respond to climate change. What I would prefer that we democratically move into a socialist model before what I foresee as us not really having a choice and us being pushed to a precipice where the world has to make a decision, where the world has to look at these 10 people that during a pandemic have doubled their wealth and doubled their own personal resources. And we have to look at them and we go, hey, my house is on fire. What are we going to do about it?
So,
right? So that would be. Sorry, go on.
Okay, from my point of view, we talk about two extremes. Both extremes are bad. So one extreme is when we indeed seize the right of ownership of means of production. Is there a shorthand for that in English? I don't know. But anyway, so in this case, we flatten society too much. And there is another extreme where we let the capitalism in free fall, and then we stretch the layers in the society too much. I think as in any social problem, you need to try to focus on the best things from both things. And I think you should allow people to live extremely good if they did something extremely good for the society. So if somebody solved the problem of hunger in Africa, then they should be set for the rest of their life. I do believe that. So on the other hand, I believe that people should not get into conditions where they have to spend all their life without opportunities to improve this life. So they should have opportunities to get a profession they want and things like that. So basically, in my mind, if you try to look at the society and their wealth, like distribution of wealth, then you need to have bottom standard of social guarantees. Like if you have no place to live, we will provide you until you will improve your life and things like that. And you can use the extreme surplus of income of wealth people in capitalism to fuel that. And if you have everybody provided this way with social guarantees, then I think that right movements will degrade, because right movements thrive on how to say,
class differentials. They thrive on other rising minorities.
I would say on social problems. When you have social problems, people go defensive and then they go right. So if you like solve this basic minimum, then people would be incentivized to, the vast majority of people would be incentivized to continue this regime. I think it is a stable model and you don't need to move towards socialism. But if you say that you would prefer a gradual transformation into socialism, like chipping piece by piece from capitalism to like carve out a socialism from that, then I kind of don't mind. I just think that while doing so, you will realize you don't need that because you will achieve some intermediate state, which is already good enough. That's how I think.
And look, I'm not. I'm not revolutionary, but like I said, I would prefer that we do this before we're forced into a position that we have to, which I believe is coming in the not too distant future, right? With what you're saying around, with the analogy of the person who solves hunger in Africa, right? Ensuring that they have everything that they need for the rest of their life, but also ensuring that there's a minimum standard. Socialism solves all of those problems without having complications, right? So it's the system that solves the hunger because we now produce for the needs of people rather than for the personal wealth of those who owns the means to produce that. So if someone does something brilliant, absolutely. If someone achieves something in science, they're already set up under the system. But also, the person who builds the Bunsen burner that helps them get there is also protected. Is also has a safety net and also has wants for nothing throughout their life. So I think you're talking about trying to use capitalism to solve problems that capitalism created in the first place.
Yeah, you say socialism doesn't cause problems. Here, I drastically disagree. Like, socialism causes a lot of problems. So it basically, socialism in our current development is not compatible with democracy. When you try to move so much power about all the means to production to one single coordinating entity, then people who work in this specific entity, how they were called in USSR nomenclatura. So this nomenclatura will be actual like corporation which owns the whole country. So until we get to some technological advances where we have some decentralized means of social governing, I don't think this is feasible. But you were feel free to interrupt me here and answer.
That's okay. Did you want to move on to the because that's the real big thing. And look, it was actually a book that I've got it here.
Yeah, let's talk climate change.
It was a book written by Christina Figueres, who was who headed up the Paris climate change accords. Right, it was the book that she wrote. It's called The Future We Choose. Now she's more on your side of the coin. She believes that there are market solutions to the social problems that we face. But look, how do we combat the facts, right? Now we understand that a lot of that wealth, right, that was built during the pandemic was from fossil fuels, right? We understand that oil companies have run very, very successful campaigns. We have states in America that are banning electric cars. By any means, and if you look at where the money flows from, you understand that the Republican that's up there saying, no, we need to protect the car industry. We know that there's a lobby group behind it. We know that these opinions in government are being paid for, right? How do we how do we solve this without it being the people themselves saying we need to reform the way that we live?
First of all, I must agree that solving climate change in capitalism is like a very difficult thing to do. I don't know what you are talking about oil during COVID, because I remember there was even a short moment in time where oil price was negative, which is pretty funny. But again, let's remember Sweden, which has 70% of renewables. Apparently, if people actually want that, then they can easily do that. So it's not a problem of capitalism, it's a problem of what do people want. I understand you would say that capitalism own media brainwash people, and thus people don't want that. And again, I even agree here, but this happens only if you have degraded political system, as in United States, where you have only two political entities and you cannot choose anything else but these two. So I think what people should actually like advocate for is not socialism, but good political system, like in Norway or in Sweden or in Ireland, where I live.
Do you think that will be enough and in time? This is my concern, because what we know, right? This is what we know through current modeling. We know that if we don't basically reduce our emissions, right, unless we achieve net zero emissions by 2030, right? We'll put it this way. It's I much prefer to put it the other way around. Okay, if we don't achieve zero emissions by 2030, or if we do achieve zero emissions by 2030, there is only a 50% chance that we will avoid a permanent 2-degree increase in the world's temperature. And that is very, very commonly agreed as the catastrophic point. I live on East Coast Australia. It's hot enough here, right?
Yeah.
The bushfires that we saw a couple of years ago here in Australia were absolutely terrifying. I went through a week of basically night here because the smoke was so fierce. We lost an incredible amount of biodiversity here in Australia during those fires. I know that the same thing happened in Canada this summer. I don't think that us sort of trying to appeal to politicians who we know receive money from oil companies, right? We know that lobbying goes on. We know that there are powers that be that behind closed doors, a lot of these decisions are made, right? And the unfortunate thing is, to see real change, it takes people taking to the streets, right? And then that only emboldens the right, because they go, oh, look at these violent demonstrations. It's like, well, no, people are trying to protect themselves.
Yeah, I just remembered a lot of French revolutions, like
absolutely the French. Our retirement age is 67. They want to put it up by 5 minutes in France, and they take to the streets. Absolutely, go for it. That's what I want to see. That's what we need more. Like, one of the really, really interesting statistics that they talked about in this book, and this actually tracks. Well, like, they give the references and it tracks worldwide, right? So if there's a popular social movement, right? If more than 3.5, there has never been a government in history that has been able to resist change where it's popular amongst the people and where more than 3.5% of the population are in active civil disobedience. There has never been a time in history that a government's been able to say, no, we'd still prefer not, thank you very much. And that tracks throughout history. And this is the problem. It's either going to be that climate change is going to be solved in larger countries that are heavily resistant, your corporatist countries, like here in Australia, like in the US. These countries are only going to change through demonstration and through people power and through people taking to the streets and putting a level of influence onto politics that we just shouldn't have to put, right? Whereas just put that power in, put that means of production, put the decision-making power on what we do, because it's excess labor. Excess labor is what will fix climate change. It's the only way, right? We use the labor that we need to survive. The excess labor is taken in taxes and it's used to fix problems like climate change, right? Or it is the capitalists, it's the business owners that reinvest that excess labor and use that to fix climate change. That's what's happened in a lot of European countries where, yes, I agree, a lot of their power is now generated by renewable energy. Why not cut it? Why not cut out the middleman? Sorry, that was a lot.
No, it's fine. First of all, like, to solve climate change, I think it's just enough to put taxes on those energy sources which has excessive emissions, and that's like it. You will just have, again, market will decide. So you put those taxes, you need to invest into removing these emissions afterwards. So basically you forced to pay for consequences. And that's it. Yeah, about middlemen. Yeah, we kind of going back and forth with this specific thing. I kind of cannot see a stable political system where you don't have a lot of political entities which compete with each other. So how would you seize means of production, ownership of means of production, to avoid owning of these means by one political entity?
It would initially need to be a single political entity that is democratically run by the people that would need to be the gradual change. And I agree. There's gonna be a period of time where, yes, you do have a single entity that needs to facilitate first the return of the excess labor to the people, and organize production based on need. Right? I agree that that's problematic. I think that I would prefer, like, put it this way on this question. I would prefer the people agreeing to moving to that single political entity with the aim of eliminating that entity. Right? Well, not eliminating. Eliminating is the wrong word. With the agreement that we are installing this entity with a sunset clause on it, that once we achieve a certain level of social cohesion after it, there's no longer any need. I would prefer that than having a system like the US does right now, where you have a very, very small and influential number of people who are basically paying politicians for their opinions, and they're paying for, and they're deliberately manipulating the democratic system to retain power. Right? You've got states like Texas who have drawn up their lines in such a way that old white men will rule Texas in perpetuity, and it's very, very difficult for any of the other majority of people to actually have any political influence. I would prefer it to be out in the open, right? It's out in the open. We've got one government at the moment under an agreed political entity. The reason that it's there is to get rid of itself and put us in a position where we don't need it. I'd prefer that than the ridiculous facade of democracy and pretending that we live in a democratic system like we do now.
So what checks and balances would you put to this political entity so that it doesn't go crazy?
whatever checks and balances the people agree upon.
Well,
that's what I'm going to say, because that's a that's probably another discussion in and of itself, as in what individual checks and balances you need to put in, right?
the problem.
Obvious.
What you just described is basically what Stalinists like try to explain me about what they wanted to achieve. So they indeed wanted to put everything into one government entity and then eventually get rid of it by going to actual communism at some point.
Yeah.
But without checks and balances, how to say this, without checks and balances you don't have feedback loop, so you basically have some moron who does whatever he wants and nobody can stop him. So I'm strongly against that. So you need to, if you would like to find more people to agree with this movement, there should be another proposal.
Yeah, it would need to be. Look, it's probably beyond my pay grade to sit down and to completely write out the and look, I agree, that's the most difficult part, right? That is the most difficult part. But what I do know is that under the system we have now, there are checks and balances, and they don't work. The checks and balances have been written by those that want to retain power anyway. So that's the problematic thing. And look, I agree that, and we're talking about Stalin again. But as I said, the problem there was, and this is where it comes to the agreement of the people, right? There needs to be. I think that the future of socialism, and for socialism to work, one, I don't think it works. You can't have a socialist country existing next to a capitalist country. That doesn't work. It's not going to work, right?
Okay.
It would need to be something that's global. It would need to be something that's agreed upon by the people. It can't be something revolutionary again. I don't think the modern world could survive another revolutionary socialism. That's why I'm an advocate for it before the point where I think that it becomes necessary for the world's survival.
There was an opinion that capitalism is very good at finding who is the best to use some amount of resources, but it's very bad on finding who will clean up the mess after somebody did something. So
absolutely.
I think we kind of converge here after talking with you. I think we don't have strong contention here. Basically, no. I'm just so if you are for gradual redistribution of excessive wealth towards social protection of people and providing them opportunity to find themselves in their life, then we are completely on the same road here, where it will lead us, nobody knows. So it's very hard to predict what goes next.
I think we could agree on one thing: capitalism is shit.
You say there is no checks and balances in the United States. I kind of disagree. There are, or in Australia, I don't know. I haven't observed Australia as much as I observed United States through internet, but. It's not binary. You have places where you actually don't have checks and balances, and you have places where you actually have checks and balances. And the United States is somewhere here. It's like 70% there. It's not that bad.
I don't know. I have great fears for a lot of people living in America at the moment, based on, and look, it ties back into what we're talking about, because I think that media, I think that indoctrination are two things that control a massive amount of political power, and especially in America. I hate to bring up the statistic again. 12% of people believe in Pizzagate. 12% of people in America believe that there's a secret adrenochrome party enjoying like it's just ridiculous. And the level of, we live in a post-information world, right? We live in a post-truth reality where even if Donald Trump went to someone's house, knocked on the door, on a Trump supporter's door, and said, I did it all, I stole the documents, I did actually commit a crime, there was no, I made the whole election, I made the whole election thing up, that person would still believe. If you interviewed that person afterwards and say, hey, do you think Trump's a criminal, they'd say no, right? These people have been so heavily indoctrinated now into this, into what is essentially a cult, that how do you get the level of education of people to like how do you move the largest country in the world now towards convincing them that go, hey, you know how it's been really, really hot this year, like record breaking hot, you know that this isn't a scam, right? Like this isn't caused by space lasers.
Well, maybe we should teach people critical thinking in school instead of everything else we teach, like geography or whatnot. Like replace the whole thing, and maybe people would figure out things themselves.
The education system.
Okay. One more question. Could you name me at least one developed capitalist system in the history which has actual famine? Is it the way to pronounce this word, right? Like famine? Strong starvation. Yes.
Yeah.
I can name a lot from socialist like camp, but I'm curious.
Look, that has,
we can name something like Africa or whatnot, but the countries where we have hunger, starvation, famine, whatnot, there it's not developed capitalism there.
Are you asking? Are you asking? So I will admit that countries that have adopted capitalism, right, have very few instances of their social network, of their ability to produce a large amount of food cheaply, but it is done off the back. The different question, and the question I'd prefer to answer, is how many famines, or can I name any famines that were caused by capitalism, not by capitalist countries, right? And then I'd probably say all of them.
I strongly disagree. For example, famine which was in Ukraine was caused by USSR regime, not by capitalism. And about caused by, I don't know. Why do you think so? If we do use cheap labor from, let's say, Africa, do you think they never had famine before and we brought famine to them? Not the opposite. We got there and the amount of famine reduced after that.
We're delving into a colonialism sort of topic here, and we're delving into basically how, and look, I'd have a lot to say about how the Western world has caused a hell of a lot of problems within African nations, and still do, right? This is where we talk about the more traditional sort of definition of exploitation of labor. And right, and I mean, when you talk about famine, I think that I don't think famine is a fantastic benchmark of no. Well, look, in the sense of like let's look at some other statistics. For example, right, in Australia, as of the 2021 census, right, we had roughly, we're a nation of 22 million-ish, something like that, 23 million. In the 2021 census, we had around 300, probably 400,000 people who were homeless in Australia, right? As of that same census, it showed that 10% of our investment properties, right? So properties that were bought in surplus of someone's principal place of residence, 10% of our properties, which accounted for roughly 13 million roofs, right? 13 million rooms of investment property were deliberately left empty to maximize negative gearing is a thing here, and also our capital gains system encourages people to buy investment properties, run them at a loss, leave them empty. You avoid capital gains tax at the sale of that property, and also the loss on that property you get back and it reduces your taxable income, right? Do we see famines? No, I think that worldwide we've been able to, through cheaper means of producing food, we have been able to stave off famine. You do have that one, but there's a lot of other hidden KPIs that I think that should be. I think we should have a higher standard. It's 2023, right? We understand crop rotation now, right? A hell of a lot of development's been put into. Has been put into now a development that's purely been put into those industries so that we can produce cheaper, right? None of the advancements in agriculture that's led to the low number, right, that you're talking about, none of those advancements were done for the betterment of people. They were done for individuals. They were done to line individuals' pockets, right? The way that we got there was through greed. So I agree. Yes, I don't think I can name a capitalist. I can name a lot of famines that were probably caused by capitalism, and a lot of poverty and hunger around the world that continues to be caused by capitalism, and a lot of really stupid things. That stat makes me angry, right? We've got double the housing space in Australia for people who, through their own personal greed, buy an investment property, buy something that could provide someone basic shelter, and then deliberately leave it empty while a homeless person sleeps on the front doorstep.
A few seconds, I'm writing down.
Oh, good.
To do not forget.
Sorry, I know I'm passionate on this topic, and I go on.
Everything is good. I want to ask our moderators. We kind of got again beyond the time limit.
Oh no,
can we continue?
You still have at least 6 minutes under normal time.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I agree that, of course, what you said in your opening statement about means for survival includes much more than just food. It's, of course, like house, for example, or something like that. Yeah, but again, I'm as a Russian, as a person who get out of Russia, I do a lot of analogies with USSR. Sorry for that, but in
That's
USSR,
fine.
people did not own their homes because it's a means of production apparently, and because of that, nomenclatura had extremely high leverage against anybody. Of course, nomenclatura owned everything, not only your home. Basically, all your life was owned. So you have to be extremely complacent. You should not express thoughts which are not tolerated, not pleasant to hear for the nomenclatura, and you should not do things, otherwise you will get into labor camp or some psychiatric where they will do crazy stuff with you. You can read about Novodvorskaya, for example. I do think that seizing means of production is an extreme thing to do, but you brought up housing crisis and things that capitalism made in global south, and this is two valid arguments. Let's discuss them. So about housing crisis, I totally agree. The current system doesn't work. And in my opinion, maybe, I don't know, it's my humble opinion. I'm just an IT person. I'm not an economist or politician or whatnot. Maybe we should limit amount of property units owned for commercial, for rent, so that if you do want to be a landlord, then you have a limit of 2 units, something like that. Otherwise, any housing surplus on the market will be bought by these landlords, and then they will just monopolize the market. And capitalism doesn't work when you have a market monopolized. It just degrades.
Absolutely. And look, I think sorry, you finish.
No, continue.
Yeah, so I think that, and look, I think that's great. Look, the two things I would do tomorrow in Australia to look at the housing crisis that we have is, one, eliminate negative gearing. Negative gearing is such a ridiculous tax benefit to the rich, right? So negative gearing, which is where you can, in Australia, you can claim, if you run an asset at a loss, right? So you buy a property, you run it at a loss, you pay more in mortgage and insurance and in payments on the house than you actually receive back in rent. So you run it as a loss. That loss reduces your taxable income for the year, right? It's a ridiculous system, right? I would remove that straight away. There are also systemic means by which governments artificially inflate property prices, right? So zoning laws, a lot of zoning when it comes to residential densities, right? Residential densities are generally kept at a means so that property prices remain artificially inflated, right? We know that as we continue more as climate change affects us more and more, we are going to need more people living in cities, right? The concept of the suburbs are going to have to become are going to have to truncate, right? We're going to need higher population densities, but we're going to need the sufficient utilities, right? We're going to need public transport. We're going to need effective public transport systems. We're going to need infrastructure within these cities to support that increased growth. And what we see happening is higher densities are only put around the limited infrastructure that the governments want to provide. And like in Australia, the amount of roads that we've got here in Australia, we are getting better. We have a driverless metro system that takes me into work every day that we're expanding upon. So we're getting better, but we're still so heavily reliant on roads to move us around. And the more low density that you have, that artificially increase, and it creates work for property developers who also who through their lobbying ensure that the systems remain in place to artificially increase housing prices. I say we don't just pop the housing bubble. I personally, I don't think that a home should be a commodity at all. I wouldn't reduce it to 2 properties. I'd reduce it to 0 properties. You live in a house, because that's the thing. If you actually look at a Marxist definition of, and because you mentioned there, the state ends up owning your home, right? The reason that happens is because, yes, in a modern sense, a investment property is technically a mode of production, because it is a wealth resource for someone. So yeah.
The problem with the home should not be a commodity is that, for example, I'm a person who travel between countries. And for example, if I will be rich enough, I might be buying another house while I haven't sold this house. So I might be in a position where I need to put the house on rent for 1 year, for example. Otherwise, it's just idling house. So I think 2 houses is fine per person. Because you could be in transitions, and putting it on rent is fine, in my opinion. What I wanted to tell, yes. I think the major root cause of this, of course, we can say about all these political decisions, blah, 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 but I think it's the root cause of all that is that the majority of people actually doesn't want housing crisis to solve, because when the housing market is in this crisis, they are much wealthier because they are homeowners, even if it's only one home. So like it's nice to buy a house for like some small amount of money, some like 30 years ago, and now be much richer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and like on the other hand, I imagine that people have this feeling that housing crisis should be solved, otherwise our children cannot like thrive and stuff like that. But at the same time, they would say, not in my backyard. I don't want to have social housing here near to me. I want this peaceful, like suburban kind of life. So get the fuck out of here. Sorry for language.
That's
yes.
all right. I've already sworn. And look, yeah, there's been a lot of, I've seen some research around that. They find social housing works best when it is interspersed. You don't create enclaves of social housing. You don't build a block of social housing. You put people within, communities, right? And screw their gentrification.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we have contention here. Just you think it is solvable through seizing means of production. I think it is solvable by getting your government in check. So maybe we should discuss what capitalism did in global world then. I imagine you have a strong opinion about that. It did a lot of horrific stuff in the world.
I think it still does to this day, and I think that it's only getting worse.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, probably I hate to refer back to the US, but the reason I always refer to the US is because it's out in the open now and no one seems to care, right? Without capitalism, without the ability of a small number of people to be able to amass massive amounts of wealth personally, their personal opinions are now they hold incredible amounts of power. And what they do with that power is they use that power to ensure that we're fighting amongst ourselves so that we don't fight against them, so that we don't realize, right? It's a ruse. Left, right, majority, minority, Republican, Democrat, right? Here in Australia, it's more pronounced. Both parties are exactly the same. The Liberal National Party is a little bit more racist and the Labor Party cares a little bit more about workers, but they're essentially in lockstep. Here in Australia, even our Reserve Bank that is supposed to be independent, and I've got a mate that now watching that's going to be screaming because he hates it when I question the independence of our Reserve Bank. They're all in lockstep. They're all saying the same thing. They're blaming us when it's corporations that are the problem that's causing the cost of living crisis, as they like to call it, which is a manufactured term. It's basically just capitalism working as it should. Right. So I don't like the fact that we're told and we are supposed to pretend that we live in a democratic system when we know that we don't, when we know that a small number of people hold an incredible amount of power through their wealth.
It sounds like domestic. I meant maybe you have a strong opinion about international stuff, like we as the West world did.
Absolutely, and I think that's where we sort of ended the exploitation of the global South, right? The fact that the tiny proportion of I mean, you would agree that the value of the products that are produced in the South is massive compared to the amount of wages and the amount of investment that we put into these countries, right?
Yeah, but the quality of life not necessarily is worse than was before.
Maybe what we should do is we should have a part 3 that talks about imperialism, and we have a part 3 that talks about. Well, we'd probably agree on imperialism, wouldn't we?
Like depends. I guess we agree up until 19th century, but I guess we disagree in 21st century.
Yeah. to say so.
I think I remember moderator said we have half hour. I think or 20 minutes. I think we exhausted these 20 minutes. So what is our state?
Yeah, did we want to move to questions? I really enjoyed this discussion, Void. Thank you very much. This one's been a lot of fun. But yeah, do we have any questions?
We have one question, and this debate has been a lot of fun for me also. I really enjoyed this one. The only question we had, wait, did we get another one? Oh no, okay. It says BTB writes that he means it says, I mean, not all of that money of the billionaires is liquid money, so they might have less liquid money than what their net worth says. Your response?
That's true.
Yeah, look, I agree that some of that, it's not actually liquid assets, it's not actually liquid money, but it's still wealth. It's still the conversion of, I think I try to think about it less in terms of money, and I think about it as extracted labor. So it's excess labor that's been taken from workers. That's what it is. But I agree that it's not all money, but go on.
Yeah, the problem here is that this wealth is actually jobs provided to the job market. So they created enterprises, they created like different foundations and stuff. This is what their wealth is. This is where people work. So when they have successful enterprise once, they used these entrusted resources to create new enterprises and new jobs. And this is like in cycle. So yeah.
But then they took all that stuff off the top too, didn't they? They did create the jobs, but they also took a lot of the they created those jobs. I agree. Enterprise creating jobs within a capitalist system is necessary for it to survive, because you need to exploit someone. There needs to be, and again, when I say exploitation, what I mean is without excess labor being produced, capitalism doesn't survive.
Let me ask a follow-up here. What like blocks you from creating an enterprise with the code which satisfy socialist ideas, so that every employee you hire gets the part of the surplus output?
Nothing essentially, but for it to produce enough under. The problem is, right, I agree, yeah, but what I would say is you're talking more about a commune, right? You're talking more about something producing a workers co-op. Yes, workers co-ops can exist where they're operating within markets that can, where they have a place in the market. Basically, a workers co-op is always going to produce goods at a higher cost than more mass produced, right? If you're going with a small number of people and you all agree on a share of that profit, and you create profit sharing, you create a workers co-op, you're not going to be able to compete with the larger players in the market. It's not going to happen. So yes, there's nothing really stopping people from doing that now. There have been success stories of that working around the world, but it's niche. It only works in specific markets. You're not going to do it to produce food for a community, so to speak.
Why wouldn't you create a big IT company this way?
For the same, IT is not an industry I know about too well when it comes to products that you're producing, right? I would assume that there would be the same restrictions, in the sense that the structure that you would need to create, where everything is distributed equally, right? And the philosophy of from each according to their ability to each according to their need doesn't work in a system where you're producing something that you're competing in a market for.
I don't know. To me, it sounds like if you try to do this approach, you just get less effective enterprise, and that's it.
Yeah,
But uh-huh.
there are well protected borders preventing people from deviating against the norm. That's
I would say
probably
this thing. I work in big tech, IT tech,
yep.
and they actually give you a share in the company when you get to the company, just because you are so valuable engineer that this is the way to keep you in the company. So isn't so basically depending on how much you contributed into growth of this company, you kind of depending on that you have the amount of shares of this company.
Yeah.
So isn't it already what people want?
To an extent, but the way that I describe what you're saying is that within the IT industry, yeah, there's a your
So it's
labor
not
is
like
your
uh-huh.
labor is highly your labor is highly sought after, right? So your labor within a capitalist system can be converted into a lot of wealth. Your labor can be converted into a lot of capital. So, um, because of that fact, those industries create favorable conditions to keep those who can convert those who they can convert their labor into the most capital.
I'm just saying, if you are a very if you are a person who brings enough value, then maybe then you got to a point where you should get a part of the company. Uh,
Mhm.
Otherwise, one person risks everything. He risks his own like everything he has just to try to make this company, but other people get rewards for that. It feels unfair.
Yeah,
Or if we allow everybody to try any enterprise for free without any risk, then there will be a lot of bad enterprises with like insane, inadequate risks.
Wow,
Uh,
absolutely.
we are definitely going to have to arrange a third debate with you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, sorry, sorry, let's fun. No, but
That's
look, that's a good point. And just to close it off, I think that's why trying to that's why I said before, having a socialist country next to a capitalist country, having small pockets of socialism working within capitalism just isn't going to work.
yeah,
They're two
okay.
contradictory systems. But thank you.
Yeah, we discussed too long one question. Okay.
well, if that's everything, would you guys like to make a closing statement, either one of you,
Oh
or
no, that's
both?
okay. I just want to reiterate that. Look, that was a really enjoyable discussion. I learned a lot, which is what I'm here to do. And look, thank you to the moderators, and thank you again, Void.
Yeah, same here. Thank you for these conversations. Thank you for hosting this. I think like our only contention is about long term, so it's actually not important. In short, it looks like in short and middle term we are in agreement. So
Mhm.
it's actually, I think, quite successful debate with quite constructive outcome. So
Well,
yeah, thank
you
you.
you two definitely need to stay in touch and find something you really disagree about, because I would love to watch that debate. All right,
Yeah.
back to my script here. I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight, and I hope you enjoyed our show. Our participants' links are in the description. If you like their performance here, please consider subscribing to their channels. Remember to hit that like button if you like the show, and also consider subscribing to our channel and hitting that bell to make sure that you do not miss any of our exciting content coming up. Thanks again for coming. Remember, let's not fight. Let's debate the topics, and let's talk about the issues.